My name is Elizabeth Collins, and I live in a small coastal town in Maine where the ocean air is salty and the winters cut straight to the bone. A place where people know your face before they know your name. And once they know your business, they never forget it. 2 months ago, something happened that should have changed my life overnight. The kind of event that turns strangers into long-lost cousins and suddenly makes every phone call urgent. I won the lottery. Millions. Life-changing money. And instead of shouting it from the rooftops, I locked it deep inside. No one knew. Not my mother, not my sister, not even Daniel, the man I've been seeing for the last 2 years. Why? Because I wanted to know the truth about the people around me? You see, my family has always had a complicated relationship with money. And with me. I was the responsible one. The one who helped cover bills when Dad got sick. The one who lent her beat-up Honda to her sister when her car was repossessed. The one who always answered the phone at 2 a.m. when Mom just needed to talk. Which usually meant she needed to borrow something. And every time I told myself it was fine. That's what family does. But there's a difference between being there for someone and being used. It started small. My sister Jenny forgetting to pay me back for the dress I bought her for a friend's wedding. My cousin Matthew crashing on my couch for a week that turned into 3 months. Even Daniel, who swore he wasn't materialistic, had a way of making big plans that always seemed to land on my dime. I'd like to say I didn't notice, but I did. I just kept telling myself loyalty and love were worth more than a bank account. That was before I learned that loyalty without reciprocity is just dependence in disguise. Winning the lottery put me face to face with a dilemma I never imagined I'd have. With all that money, I could fix almost everyone's problems, pay off debts, buy cars, wipe away years of struggle in a stroke. But should I? More importantly, who would even lift a finger for me if they didn't know I could change their life in return? I didn't want their gratitude. I wanted their truth. The week before it happened, I was living paycheck to paycheck, managing the front desk of a small hotel downtown. My days were spent checking in tired travelers and making polite small talk, and my nights were a cycle of reheated leftovers and reruns. Daniel would stop by a few evenings a week, but even that had started to feel transactional. When I'd mention being tired, he'd say, "You just need a break. We should go on vacation." Which sounded nice until vacation meant I booked it, paid for it, and planned every detail. I remember the day I found out I'd won. It was a Tuesday in early spring. Gray skies, drizzle on the pavement, the kind of weather that makes you want to disappear under a blanket. I was standing in line at the grocery store, holding my coffee and a winning ticket I'd only checked because I had an extra 2 minutes. My heart was pounding so hard I thought people could hear it. But I forced myself to keep calm, to smile faintly as if nothing had happened. Because the moment you show your cards, the game changes forever. That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table, staring at the check in my hands. I could almost hear the voices of my family if they knew. The shock, the flattery, the sudden offers to help me manage my money. I'd been invisible for years, except when they needed something. Now I imagined being the center of attention, and it didn't feel like love. It felt like a feeding frenzy, and that's when the idea hit me. What if I flipped the script? What if instead of giving, I asked? What if I pretended to be in need, really in need, and saw who would step up? Not because they'd get something out of it, but because they cared. It wouldn't just be a test of loyalty. It would be my answer to every unspoken question I'd carried for years. Who's in my life because of me? And who's here for what I can give them? I knew it was risky. I knew I might lose people I loved. But the truth was, I'd been losing them for years, piece by piece, every time I swallowed my pride and said, "Sure, I can help," when no one ever asked if I was okay. The days that followed were strange, like living in 2 realities at once. Outwardly, I was still Elizabeth, the hotel receptionist with a modest apartment and a hand-me-down couch. Inside, I was sitting on a fortune. My every interaction suddenly felt like part of an unspoken experiment. And in the back of my mind, one thought pulsed like a drumbeat. When I ask for help, who will answer? I decided to start small, to test the waters before I dove in. But before I could make my first call, something happened that nearly made me call the whole thing off. The morning after I checked the numbers, I woke before dawn, heart pounding so loud it drowned out the hum of the fridge. My apartment felt different. Not bigger, not smaller, just charged. Like the walls knew my secret. I didn't even turn on the light. I reached into my nightstand until my fingers found the gritty edge of the lottery ticket. It felt fragile, almost weightless, and yet I could swear it made my hand heavier. The advice I'd read online echoed in my head. Sign it immediately. I grabbed a pen, my fingers shaking so much my signature came out uneven. 3 quick photos, front, back, and one next to today's paper, and I tucked it into my robe pocket like it was a newborn. When the lottery office opened, I dialed. "State lottery claims, how can I help you?" "I think I have a winning ticket," I said, my voice too calm for what I was feeling. They took the numbers, confirmed them, and then the woman's tone shifted. "First, don't tell anyone. Second, sign it in ink, which you've done. Keep it safe, preferably in a safe deposit box. And consider hiring an attorney before claiming it." An attorney. That word alone made the weight of what I'd won feel real. By noon, I was at the bank, standing in front of a safe deposit box with a clerk who had no idea the little envelope I slid inside could buy every house on her street. When the metal door clicked shut, I felt both safer and strangely vulnerable. Like now that it was locked away, I had nothing to show for what had happened. Walking home, my thoughts clashed like cymbals. You could change your family's lives forever. They'll drain you dry. You could finally leave this town, but you'll be leaving alone. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee and Googled Lottery Attorney Maine. The next morning, I was in Ms. Patel's office, warm lighting, bookshelves lined with thick legal volumes, and a quiet authority in the way she looked at me. "You're doing the right thing by telling no one," she said. "We'll set up a trust so you can claim anonymously. No sudden purchases, no big gifts for at least 3 months. Give yourself space to think before others try to think for you." Her words hit me hard. She didn't know my family, but she might as well have lived in my skin. For years, I'd been the one bailing people out, covering emergencies that never ended. It wasn't just about the money. It was the way they took, without ever wondering if I had anything to give. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, and the idea came. If I told them I'd won, I'd never know if the kindness was real or bought. But if I asked for help, without them knowing I had millions, I'd see the truth. No excuses, no, "I didn't realize you needed it." Just a clear answer to the question I'd been carrying for years. Would they be there for me if I couldn't give them anything in return? The next afternoon, I claimed the prize through the trust. No oversized check, no cameras, no fanfare. Just a quiet transaction in a beige office with fluorescent lighting. The numbers on the paperwork didn't look real. Too many zeros, like someone had typed them wrong. But they were mine. By the time I got home, the first portion had hit the account. I stared at my phone screen until my throat tightened. I could walk away from everything right now. My job, my apartment, even this town. But leaving without answers felt like running from the wrong problem. I grabbed a notebook and started a list of names. Mom, my sister Jenny, cousin Matthew, Daniel, my manager Claire, 2 close friends, Sam and Lila. Next to each name, I wrote a small specific request that would be believable coming from me as regular Liz. A ride to the mechanic, a short-term loan for a medical bill, help moving a couch. Nothing outrageous, just enough to see if they'd inconvenience themselves for me. The first name I circled was Jenny. My sister has a way of wrapping every request in a joke so she can claim she's just kidding if you say no. When my phone buzzed with a text from her that night, "Brunch this weekend? You're paying, kidding?" Not really, LOL. I almost laughed. She was practically volunteering to be the first test. But the stakes made my chest tighten. Asking for help would feel exposing, vulnerable in a way money could never protect me from. I took a deep breath, scrolled to her contact, and tapped the call button. She answered on the third ring, her voice bright over the clatter of a busy cafe. "Hey, you caught me at a good time. What's up? Can I ask you for a favor?" My words came out softer than I meant them to. There was a pause. Short, but long enough for me to hear the tiny shift in her tone. "Depends," she said. "How big?" I stared out my kitchen window at the dark street, the flicker of a street lamp catching in the rain. My pulse thudded in my ears. This was just the beginning. I decided to start with Jenny, partly because she was the safest, and partly because I needed to know right away. We met at a cozy brunch spot downtown, the kind of place with chalkboard menus and the smell of cinnamon in the air. She was already seated, hair perfectly straightened, scrolling on her phone with a mimosa half drunk in front of her. "Hey," she said, standing to give me a quick hug before sitting back down. "I already ordered the pancakes. They're huge. We can share." I waited until the waitress left before leaning in. "Actually, I wanted to ask you something. My car's making this awful noise, and the mechanic says it's unsafe to drive. The repair's going to run about $600. I was wondering if you could help me cover it, just until Friday?" Jenny's smile froze like a photo on pause. "600?" she repeated. "Wow, that's a lot." She picked up her mimosa, took a slow sip, then set it down carefully. "You know things have been tight since I switched jobs." I kept my voice soft. "I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important." Her eyes darted away. "I could maybe do 50, she said, almost like she was doing me a favor. Then, a beat later, "But I'd need it back by next week for sure." It was more than nothing, but it wasn't the reaction I'd hoped for. I forced a grateful smile. "I understand. 50 would help." She nodded, visibly relieved to have given something without overcommitting. But as I watched her wave down the waitress for another mimosa, I felt that familiar pang, the one that said I was worth exactly as much as she could comfortably spare. 2 days later, I drove out to my mother's house, the small, weathered bungalow I grew up in. She was on the porch, wrapped in a sweater, smoking. The air smelled like salt and cold earth. "Lizzie," she said, smiling, "what's the occasion?" I sat next to her on the porch swing, listening to it creak under our weight. "I hate to bother you, but I've hit a rough patch. My heating bill this month is double what I expected, and I'm short. Could you lend me $100 until payday?" Her smile faded. She took a drag from her cigarette, exhaled slowly. "Honey, I wish I could. But you know how it is. Social Security doesn't go far, and I just paid for that new water heater." "I understand," I said quickly, before she could spiral into her usual list of bills and grievances. She reached over and patted my hand. "You're a smart girl. You'll figure it out. You always do." The words were meant to comfort, but they landed heavy. Not because she couldn't help. I believed her. But because there wasn't even a flicker of how can I try. No suggestion of pawning something, calling a friend, or making space at her table for me until things got better. Just the assumption I'd manage alone. When I left, she hugged me tightly and told me to keep her posted. Driving away, the radio low, I realized I wouldn't. By the end of the week, I needed a break from family. That's when I thought of Sam, a friend I'd known since college, the kind of person who once stayed up all night helping me move out of a bad apartment. We hadn't been as close lately, life pulling us in different directions, but there was still an ease between us whenever we reconnected. We met at a quiet bar near the waterfront, the air thick with the scent of fried fish and beer. He was already at the counter, laughing with the bartender, but turned the moment he saw me. "Liz, it's been too long." We settled into a booth in the corner. After some small talk, I took a breath. "Sam, I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important, but could you give me a ride to the urgent care tomorrow? I'm having this weird dizziness, and my car's in the shop." His brows knit instantly. "Of course. What time?" I blinked. "You don't even want to know the details first?" "You said urgent care, not a trip to the mall," he said with a shrug. "And if you're dizzy, You shouldn't be driving. I'll pick you up. Just text me your address. It was such a straightforward yes that it almost made my eyes sting. No hesitation, no conditions, no subtle reminders of his own inconveniences. Just yes. We talked for another hour, catching up like no time had passed. As we said goodbye in the parking lot, he clapped a hand on my shoulder and said, "Don't worry, Liz. We'll get you sorted." I walked back to my apartment with a strange lightness in my chest. It wasn't about the ride. It was about being treated like I mattered without having to earn it. 3 tests, 3 answers. Jenny had offered a token gesture, more to soothe her own conscience than to really help. Mom had shut down with polite regret. And Sam had just said yes, like it was nothing at all. I sat at my kitchen table that night, looking at the list of names. Next to Sam's, I put a small star. It wasn't proof of anything yet. One favor didn't tell the whole story. But it was enough to make me wonder if maybe, just maybe, this test wouldn't end with me standing alone. Of course, the next names on my list were the harder ones, the ones who, if I was right, would confirm exactly why I'd kept my secret in the first place. We met at the marina restaurant Daniel loved, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the harbor, soft jazz curling through the air, lemon butter from the kitchen drifting over our table. He kissed my cheek, pulled out my chair, and picked up the wine list with a smile that didn't know what was coming. "Before we order," I began, my hands folded tight on the table to stop them from trembling, "I need to ask you something. My car's in the shop, and the suspension repair is more than I can cover until Friday. Could you loan me $200? He froze mid-page flip. "$200? He repeated, his tone dropping a degree cooler. "Liz, we've talked about boundaries. I don't want to be your ATM. We haven't actually talked about this," I said evenly. "I'm not asking for a habit, just a one-time favor." He leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful look on his face that I recognized as his way of lining up a no, without sounding like the bad guy. "I think it's better for you to find another solution. Maybe ask your family, or take Ubers for a bit. Builds resilience." "So, no?" "Not this time." He closed the menu, smiling again as if that wrapped the conversation. The waiter arrived and he ordered the halibut with practiced charm, pivoting straight to wine pairings. I ordered the cheapest thing I could find, my appetite gone. He kissed my forehead after dinner. "Proud of you for asking," he said. "Even if the answer is no, communication is key." On the ride home, my phone buzzed with his Instagram story. Cocktails clinking at a high-end bar downtown. "Work hard, play harder," the caption read. Saturday was windy and raw, the kind of weather that made my apartment's drafty windows a liability. I texted Matthew, "Could you help me move a couch down 2 flights? I'll buy pizza." He responded instantly, "Only if you cover gas," then called me. "My back's been killing me," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "But if you can front 40 for a dolly, we're set." "I can't front it," I replied. "That's why I'm asking for help." "Well," he drawled, "maybe I help another way. There's a crypto flip going on right now. We could double your money in a week. You toss in 200. I'm asking for help with a couch, not an investment." He chuckled, a sound that carried an edge. "You're too focused on small problems, Liz. Think bigger. Don't get stuck in the little stuff." We hung up, and not 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a notification from the family group chat I barely looked at anymore. At the top, a screenshot of my text to Matthew. Below it, a line of laughing emojis, a meme about that cousin who's always broke, and an aunt's comment, "She works at a hotel. How is she always broke?" I stared until the words blurred. Not one person in that chat had messaged me directly to ask if I was okay. He never came to move the couch. Monday morning at the hotel, the lobby smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. Claire, my manager, was reviewing the schedule when I approached. "Do you have a minute?" "For you, always," she said, though her eyes stayed on the screen. "I hate to ask, but is there any way to get a small advance? Heating bill and car repair hit at once, and I'm short." Her brow furrowed. "Corporate banned advances last quarter, but there's a hardship fund. I'll email HR right now and mark it urgent. By late afternoon, no reply. At 6, she returned with a frown. They need the bill, plus 3 months of bank statements. That's a lot for $100, I said. I told them it's invasive, she muttered. I'll push back. By midnight, an email arrived. Processing time, 10-14 business days. Claire hovered nearby, guilt in her eyes. I'm sorry, I'll keep trying. I knew she meant it, but meaning didn't pay the bill. That night, my apartment felt colder than it should have. I texted Lila, one of the few people I trusted, asking if she could watch my place during a maintenance visit. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Nothing. I tried again. If not, no worries. Still nothing. Maybe she was asleep. Maybe she forgot. But the silence pressed down harder than any outright rejection. By the end of the week, almost every name on my list was crossed off. Jenny's small loan came with a pointed reminder to repay quickly. Daniel sent me a link to a podcast about financial independence. Matthew posted another meme in the family chat, this one about princess problems. Claire kept apologizing, but HR's wheels turned too slow to matter. Lila hadn't responded at all. The plan I'd thought would be a fair test of loyalty now felt like I'd set traps just to watch people fail. And fail they did, with excuses, with laughter, with silence. I sat on the floor next to my still-stuck couch, looking at the one name I hadn't crossed off. Lila. She had the least to give, which was exactly why I hadn't asked her first. I told myself it was to spare her, but deep down, I think I was afraid she'd disappoint me too. Still, she was the only one left. I typed, "If you're awake, I could use a hand tomorrow. No money. Just a hand." I sent it before I could delete it. For a long moment, nothing. The silence stretched, the dark room closing in. My chest felt hollow, like I'd already gotten my answer. Then the phone buzzed. Lila. "Where are you?" Lila showed up at my door the next morning before I'd even made coffee. She was wearing her work scrubs, hair tied back, and carrying a travel mug in one hand and a grocery bag in the other. "I didn't know what you needed, so I brought both," she said, stepping past me without ceremony. She set the bag on the counter. Bread, peanut butter, soup cans, a carton of eggs. "You didn't have to." "Yeah, I did," she cut in, kicking off her sneakers. "Now, where's the lock that needs watching?" I hesitated, still processing the fact she'd actually come. Maintenance is supposed to fix it at noon. I just didn't want them here alone. She nodded like that was the most reasonable thing in the world. "Got it. I'll stick around until they're done." I made us coffee, and we sat at the kitchen table while the winter light slanted across the floor. She asked about work, about my mom, about my sister. No awkward circling back to why I needed her help. No subtle fishing for details. When I tried to thank her again, she waved me off. "Don't make it weird. You needed someone, I was free. That's it." "It's not just it for me," I said quietly. Her eyes softened. "I get that. But, Liz, you've been there for me more times than I can count." She leaned back in her chair, coffee mug cradled in both hands. "Remember when my heat went out that winter after I moved here? You brought me your extra space heater and stayed 2 nights until the landlord fixed it. You didn't even know me that well yet." "That was different," I said. "No," she shook her head. "It was exactly this. You had a little and you gave it. I've never forgotten that." We were quiet for a moment, the hum of the fridge filling the space. Then she told me a story I'd never heard. "When I was a kid," she began, "we lived in a trailer outside Augusta. My mom worked nights at a diner, and there was this older woman, Mrs. Carter, who lived 3 lots down. She didn't have much, lived on canned soup and Social Security, but she checked on us every morning. Once, my mom got sick and couldn't work for a week. We had almost nothing in the cupboards. Mrs. Carter brought over 2 grocery bags: cereal, milk, bread, peanut butter. I knew she'd bought it with money she needed for herself." Lila's voice caught a little, and she smiled faintly. "I asked her why she gave it to us, and she said, because I can't stand knowing I could help and didn't. That stuck with me. It wasn't about the money. It was about not letting someone drown when you can throw them a rope. I sat there, my throat tight, realizing that was exactly what she'd done for me. She didn't have much. Her car was 10 years old. Her rent ate half her paycheck. But she'd shown up. No excuses, no calculations, no public performance. At noon, maintenance arrived. A young guy with a clipboard and a tool belt. Lila stayed in the living room with me while he worked, chatting about her clients, her garden plans for spring. When the lock was fixed, she stood, grabbed her bag, and brushed her hands together. "All right, problem solved," she said. "You really didn't have to bring food," I said again, my voice low. "I really did," she said, meeting my eyes. "Because you're my friend, Liz. That means more than keeping score." After she left, I sat at the table staring at the grocery bag she'd brought. I thought about Jenny's $50 with the quick payback request. About Daniel's smooth refusal disguised as a lesson. About Matthew's group chat. Claire's well-meaning but powerless attempts. The silence from others. And then about Lila, who had the least, showing up without being asked twice, carrying more than I'd asked for. It hit me then. The test had been about finding who would give without expecting, but the truth was simpler. The people with the least to spare often give the most freely. I remembered sitting alone with my winning ticket that first night, thinking I wanted to know the difference between love and convenience. Lila had just answered it. I made a note in my phone. Give her back double in a way that doesn't embarrass her. I didn't know exactly how yet. Maybe paying off her car quietly, or slipping an envelope under her door before rent was due. But I knew I would. Not because I owed her, but because I couldn't stand knowing I could help and didn't. As I put away the groceries she'd brought, I realized my shoulders felt lighter. Not because my problems were solved, but because I knew I wasn't completely alone. And that changed everything. When Lila left that day, I sat in the quiet with my hands wrapped around my coffee, staring at the faint outline her shoes had left on the mat. That grocery bag on my counter wasn't just food. It was proof. Proof that loyalty isn't tied to wealth, and that generosity isn't about the size of the gift, but the heart behind it. I knew what I needed to do. The test had given me answers, some I'd expected, some I hadn't wanted to see. I had to face the people who had failed it, not to punish them, but to set boundaries I should have set years ago. And if I was going to move forward with this money, I needed a clean slate. A week later, I invited my family to my apartment. Jenny, Mom, Matthew, and even Daniel showed up, each looking slightly curious, like they'd walked into a meeting without knowing the agenda. Claire couldn't make it, but I'd talk to her separately. I kept it casual, coffee brewing, pastries on the table, and waited until everyone had a cup in hand. "I wanted to talk about something," I began, leaning against the counter. "Last week, I reached out to all of you for help. Small things. A loan until Friday, a ride, help moving furniture. None of it was huge." Jenny shifted in her seat. "You're making it sound like we all said no." I nodded. "Because most of you did. And that's okay. You don't owe me help, but what surprised me was the way it happened. The conditions, the deflections, the public jokes." I let my eyes rest on Matthew, who dropped his gaze. It made me realize that for years, I've been giving without ever asking for much in return. And the moment I did, it got uncomfortable. Mom sighed, looking anywhere but at me. "You've always been the strong one, Liz. We figured you'd be fine." "That's exactly it," I said. "You assumed I'd be fine, so you didn't have to show up. And I've let that slide for a long time. But from now on, I'm not lending money. I'm not rescuing anyone from bad planning or covering bills without being asked about my own. I'm done being the fallback plan." Jenny's cheeks flushed. "So what? You're just cutting us off?" "I'm drawing a line," I said. "If you want a relationship with me, it has to go both ways. That's the only way it's real." No one said much after that. They left soon after, taking their coffee cups with them like they couldn't leave fast enough. It wasn't explosive. but the silence after the door closed felt like a shift in the air. The next day at work, I pulled Claire aside. "I know you tried with HR," I told her. "That meant more than you realize. I also know your hands were tied." She smiled ruefully. "Corporate policies are designed to make you stop asking." "Exactly, which is why I'm resigning." Her eyebrows shot up. "Liz, I've got an opportunity to do something different," I said, "and I'm taking it. But before I go, I want you to know that out of everyone I asked, you at least tried. That's rare." She hugged me hard, and for the first time in months, I felt the weight on my shoulders ease. 2 weeks later, I paid off Lila's car loan in full, quietly, through her credit union. I didn't tell her it was me, but I knew she'd figure it out when her next statement came. A week later, she showed up at my door with a bag of groceries again, grinning. "You're a terrible liar," she said, setting the bag down. "And you're terrible at taking thank yous," I replied. We both laughed, and it struck me how simple and light friendship can feel when it's built on something real. A year to the day after I claimed my winnings, my life barely resembled what it had been. I'd bought a small house on a quiet stretch of the coast. Not a mansion, just something that felt like mine. The kitchen smelled of fresh bread most mornings, and the view from the porch was the kind of thing I used to think belonged only to other people. I left the hotel job for good and invested in a small boutique inn with Lila as my partner. She runs the day-to-day. I handle the books and marketing. Business is good, and we keep a few rooms aside for locals in tough spots. Free for a week, no questions asked. That was my one personal rule. Always keep a rope to throw someone else, the way Lila once threw me hers. As for my family, things shifted. Jenny still texts, but less often, and usually without asking for money. Matthew's gone quiet except for the occasional group chat meme. Mom visits sometimes, and while we don't talk about the confrontation, there's a tentative respect in the space between us now. Daniel and I broke up a month after that dinner. It wasn't messy, just the slow realization that we'd been walking different roads for a long time. Claire and I still meet for lunch every few months. She left the hotel too, and runs operations for a nonprofit that helps displaced families. She says she's never been happier. The money gave me freedom, but it didn't fix everything. It didn't rewrite the people who'd already shown me who they were. What it did was give me the ability to choose where to live, how to spend my days, and who to keep in my circle. Looking back, the test wasn't really about seeing who would hand me a few dollars or move a couch. It was about stripping away the transactions and seeing who still stood next to me. Most people stepped back when there was nothing in it for them. A few leaned in. And that's all I needed to know. Wealth changes how people see you. Sometimes it makes them admire you, sometimes resent you, sometimes just see an opportunity. But loyalty doesn't care about bank accounts. It's in the small moments. The ride to urgent care, the hand on your arm when you're overwhelmed, the grocery bag dropped on your counter without fanfare. The lottery gave me millions, but it was Lila, with her travel mug and her bag of soup cans, who reminded me what was actually priceless. If you had the chance to test the loyalty of everyone in your life, knowing it might change those relationships forever, would you do it? Have you ever tested someone's loyalty? And if you did, were you ready for the answer? Thanks so much for watching and spending this time with me. This story was personal, and I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever tested someone's loyalty or seen someone's true colors when you needed them most? Share your thoughts or experiences in the comments, because I read every single one. If you connected with this story, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss the next one. Until then, take care of yourself and the people who truly show up.